They buried her alive, but she escaped. "I cannot fail you, my little one," Elara whispered as the icy wind howled through the corridors of the abandoned castle. Her granddaughter, Layla, feverish, coughed convulsively in her arms, and each echo seemed like a lament from the past. Then a sinister creak came from the depths of the fortress, and what she discovered in the darkness of that forbidden place was not a curse, but the promise of a destiny that could save them or condemn them forever. The sinister creak reverberated, not like a ghost's cry, but like the groan of something ancient opening. Elara clutched Layla to her chest, feeling the girl's feverish heat burn through her thin clothes. The sound came from a part of the castle that seemed more dilapidated than the others, a stretch of wall covered in ivy and moss, where the darkness was so dense it seemed to suck away the little light that filtered through the cracks. Her eyes, accustomed to the gloom, tried to penetrate the veil of eternal night that reigned there. A small tremor ran through the floor beneath her feet, and a handful of dust and small pebbles crumbled from above, falling with a soft whisper. "What is it, Grandma?" Layla's voice was a thread, hoarse and weak, but the question brought Elara back to reality. There was no time for foolish fears. If there was something there, good or bad, she needed to know. Her granddaughter's life depended on every decision, every step. With a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of all her years, Elara moved forward, her heart beating like a war drum in her aged chest. Each step was cautious, the ground uneven and treacherous, and the air grew denser, smelling of damp earth and centuries of oblivion. As she approached, Elara realized the creak wasn't from a door, but from a fissure that had opened in the stone wall, revealing a narrow, dark passage. It wasn't a common door, but a stone panel that had given way, perhaps due to the passage of time or some subterranean movement. The opening was almost imperceptible, disguised by vegetation and the ruin itself. She fumbled along the rough edge, feeling the coldness of the ancient stone. A breath of damp, still air came from within, bringing with it a peculiar aroma different from the mold and dust of the main castle. It was a metallic, almost earthy smell, with a hint of something sweet and unknown. Elara's mind reeled. Could it be a trap, a den of wild animals, or perhaps the answer to her desperate prayers? Layla coughed again, a hollow sound that tore through the silence and Elara's soul. The girl huddled closer, seeking comfort in her grandmother's embrace. Her lips were cracked, and her pale, almost translucent skin contrasted with the flush of fever. Elara felt a pang of guilt for dragging her granddaughter to that desolate place, but there was no other choice. The castle was the only barrier between them and the cruelty of the outside world, the greed of her late husband's relatives, who would not rest until they saw them utterly annihilated. "Come, my dear," Elara whispered, her voice choked with emotion, but firm in determination. "Grandma will find a safe place for you." She adjusted Layla in her arms, protecting her as much as possible. The entrance was narrow, requiring Elara to contort herself to pass, which was difficult with her granddaughter in her arms. The darkness inside was absolute, a heavy cloak that seemed to swallow any remnant of hope, but Elara did not give up. The image of Layla's fragile smile, even amidst her illness, was the flame that drove her. She needed warmth, food, healing, and if this secret passage held the slightest possibility, Elara would uncover it. With one last look at the desolate corridor, where the wind continued to mourn, Elara hugged Layla and, with an act of courage that only a grandmother's love can inspire, forced her tired body through the fissure. The air inside was heavier, almost suffocating, but strangely warmer. Her feet fumbled on the uneven ground, and the darkness seemed to whisper ancient secrets. She felt a strange sensation, as if she were entering not just a chamber, but another time, a place forgotten by the world, the promise of an uncertain destiny, which had previously hung like a threat, now transformed into an irresistible call, propelling her into the unknown, all for Lila. The tunnel was narrow and winding, descending gently into the earth's entrails. Ilara, with Layla nestled close, advanced with extreme difficulty, her back bent, her shoulders aching. The darkness was dense, the air heavy. Each step was an act of faith, her hands fumbling along the damp walls. Layla, in her feverish stupor, let out a weak moan. The girl was growing increasingly limp, the heat of her body a burning ember against her grandmother's chest. "We're almost there, my love," Ilara whispered. More to herself, trying to instill courage. She felt cold sweat trickling from anguish. What awaited her? A refuge or a dead end? At each turn, hope and despair alternated, a silent battle in the darkness. Her eyes tried in vain to discern light, but only blackness enveloped her. Suddenly, the tunnel opened. Ilara felt the space expand. A breath of less dense air enveloped her. She was in a chamber, almost total darkness. Carefully she moved, her feet sliding on a smoother floor. Slowly, her eyes adjusted, and a ghostly gloom revealed the contours of a circular room, surprisingly well preserved. The walls were of polished stone, and in the center she discerned an elevated structure covered by a thick, dusty cloth. A thread of light, almost imperceptible, filtered from a high crevice, revealing dust dancing in the still air. It wasn't sunlight, but a pale, bluish glow, perhaps from a subterranean source. Ilara felt hope. That place was not ruin. It was a secret chamber, untouched by time. She approached the central structure, her heart beating with apprehension and expectation. Layla, sensing the change, opened her eyes for an instant, fixed on the darkness, before closing them again with a faint sigh. Ilara gently placed Layla on the ground, on her cloak, and knelt, caressing her warm forehead. "Hold on, my angel," she murmured, her voice choked. The sight of her granddaughter so fragile renewed her strength. She needed to act. With trembling hands, Ilara pulled back the cloth. Beneath the dust, a finely carved stone pedestal was revealed, and upon it, not gold and jewels, but something more valuable. A small chest of dark wood, adorned with delicate carvings, and beside it, a clay pot with a withered plant, but with some leaves still green. A wave of emotion washed over her. The peculiar smell came from the plant. Could it be the medicinal herb? Her fingers brushed the leaves, feeling a strange energy, a subtle warmth. Beside the pot, a rolled parchment, tied with a dried leather thong. With reverent care, Ilara untied the thong. The pale light barely illuminated the letters, but she could discern drawings and symbols. It was a map. And inside the small chest, which opened with a soft creak, lay an ancient diary, its pages yellowed and filled with elegant calligraphy. Ilara felt a deep certainty that place was not a refuge of despair, but a sanctuary of secrets, a gift from the past that could rewrite Layla's future. Her eyes filled with tears, not of sadness, but of overwhelming hope. A grandmother's love, Ilara's unwavering strength, had finally found a way. Tears of hope streamed down Ilara's wrinkled face as she leaned over the clay pot, her eyes fixed on the plant. The leaves, though withered, exuded an aroma that now seemed less strange and more promising. With a racing heart, she remembered the ancient stories her own grandmother told about miraculous herbs, capable of warding off the most stubborn fevers. Could this be the answer to her prayers? Ilara's hand trembled as she touched a leaf, feeling its slightly velvety, almost vibrant texture. An intuitive, deep and ancestral knowledge seemed to ignite in her soul, whispering that yes, this was the herb. With urgency, but with the utmost delicacy, she plucked some leaves, gently crushing them between her fingers. The scent intensified, a green and earthy balm. Quickly, Elara took the small leather canteen she carried, containing the little water that remained. She mixed the crushed leaves in the water, creating a greenish paste. Her eyes turned to Layla, who lay on the cloak, her breathing short and ragged. The girl looked even paler under the filtering bluish light, and the heat of her forehead was alarming. "Please, God, let this be it," Elara murmured, her voice choked. She lifted Layla's head with extreme care, supporting it on her arm. With a finger moistened with the paste, she touched her granddaughter's parched lips, trying to make the girl swallow a little of the mixture. Layla moaned, but a small swallowing reflex could be perceived. Elara repeated the process patiently, drop by drop, feeling each second as an eternity, each small portion of the herb as a silent prayer for her granddaughter's life. While Layla struggled to absorb the small dose of the improvised remedy, Elara turned her attention to the diary and the map, which rested on the pedestal. Curiosity, mixed with the need to understand what she had found, was almost as powerful as her concern for Layla. With still trembling hands, she opened the diary. The first pages, written in elegant calligraphy, but slightly faded by time, revealed the name of an ancestress, Lyra. The words spoke of a forbidden love, a secret carefully guarded, and a forgotten royal lineage that had been unjustly stripped of its throne and riches. Elara's heart leaped. Forgotten lineage. Layla, could it be? The diary mentioned a treasure, not of gold and jewels, but of knowledge and a legacy that needed to be reclaimed. And the true proof of Layla's identity, was linked to that castle, to that secret chamber. The pages described the castle not as a cursed place, but as a sanctuary, a refuge built to protect the last link of a noble and just family. Beside the diary, the map was even more enigmatic. Drawings of constellations, archaic symbols, and lines that seemed to trace subterranean paths, mingled with notes in a language Elara barely recognized, but which felt familiar, like a distant echo of forgotten lullabies. There was a spot marked with a small X in the center of the map, and the description beside it spoke of the Fountain of Life, a place where the healing herb grew in abundance and where the family's true legacy was kept. Elara felt a wave of strength course through her tired body. It wasn't just Layla's cure she had found, but the truth about her own family, the redemption of a stolen past. The misery and desolation that had pursued her now seemed like a veil to be torn. The love for Layla, which had driven her through so many dangers, had led her to unravel not just a secret, but a destiny. She looked at Layla, who seemed a little calmer, her breathing still fragile, but less strained. The greenish paste on the girl's lips was a sign of hope. Elara knew the cure wouldn't be instantaneous, but the seed of recovery had been planted. With a deep sigh, she closed the diary, holding it close to her chest. The castle, once a symbol of despair and dark legends, now revealed itself as a cradle of hope, a home of redemption. Elara felt that the journey was just beginning, and that the unwavering strength of her grandmother's love would be the compass to rewrite Layla's destiny and her family's legacy. Elara clutched the diary to her chest, feeling the warmth of the ancient pages mingle with her own newfound hope. Her tear-filled eyes gazed at Layla, who now rested with a slightly less agitated stillness. The girl's breathing, though still fragile, seemed softer, less strained. A pale flush replaced the previous grayish tone on her cheeks, and the sweat that covered her forehead with a feverish sheen seemed to have lessened. Elara touched her granddaughter's skin, and the warmth, though present, was no longer the consuming fire that had terrified her. A pang of relief, as intense as the pain she had felt before, coursed through her tired body. The herb was working, a small miracle in the midst of the darkness. A deep sigh escaped Elara's lips, It wasn't an instant cure, but a relief, a breath of life that urged her to continue. Delicately, she reopened the diary, the yellowed pages whispering secrets from a distant time. The bluish light of the chamber, once so mysterious, now seemed like a beacon, illuminating the words of Lyra, the ancestress who had etched her story onto those leaves. Elara read about the betrayal, the greed that had stripped Lyra and her family of their kingdom, not by force of arms, but by intrigues and falsehoods. The castle, which Elara had thought was merely a refuge of dark legends, was, in fact, a sanctuary built with the last hope of a noble lineage, a place to protect truth and the future. Lyra's pain echoed her own, but her resilience inspired Elara's heart beat with a new urgency. Lyra wrote of a legacy of light, a treasure not of gold or jewels, but of justice and honor, a birthright that had been stolen. And this legacy, this lineage, belonged to Layla. Lyra's descriptions of her family's traits, honey-colored eyes, light brown hair that seemed golden in the sun, a small, star-shaped birthmark on the left wrist, were like a mirror to her granddaughter's image. Elara lifted Layla's wrist, and there, faint but unmistakable, was the small star. Irrefutable proof, an unbreakable link to the past and the promise of a future. A solitary tear streamed down Elara's face, a mix of sadness for what had been lost and joy for what could be recovered. With tear-filled eyes, Elara turned to the map. The archaic symbols and constellations that had once seemed indecipherable now took on new meaning. Lyra had drawn subterranean paths that led to a place called the Fountain of Life. The diary explained that it was not only where the healing herb grew in abundance, but also the site of an ancient sanctuary, where the complete history of the lineage was kept, protected for generations. It was there that the family's true power resided, not in weapons, but in wisdom and connection to the earth. The Fountain of Life was the key to Layla's complete healing and to the restoration of what had been stolen from them, a beacon to guide their steps in the darkness. A renewed strength coursed through Elara, dispelling the weariness and hopelessness that had accompanied her for so long. The misery and persecution from her ambitious relatives, who had disinherited her and forced her to flee, now seemed small compared to the magnitude of what she had discovered. It wasn't just Layla's survival at stake, but the redemption of an entire lineage, the restoration of justice long denied. The castle, once a refuge of despair and dark legends, transformed into a beacon of hope and purpose. Elara knelt beside her granddaughter, kissing her forehead with tenderness. "We will rewrite our story, my dear," she whispered, her voice firm, her heart filled with unwavering determination. The seed of hope had sprouted, and Elara was ready to nurture it, whatever the cost, for Layla and for all the forgotten generations. Elara held the diary against her chest, Lyra's words echoing in her mind. The star on Layla's wrist, irrefutable proof of the lineage, burned in her memory like a flame. The kiss on her granddaughter's forehead sealed a silent pact. She would do whatever it took. Weariness weighed on her, but the discovery had injected an energy that overcame exhaustion. Layla, in her arms, was breathing more regularly, a faint but precious sign of improvement. Carefully, Elara placed Layla on the cloak and knelt beside her. The girl's lips were still parched, but the feverish flush had diminished. Elara touched her forehead again. The warmth, though present, was no longer alarming. The herb was working, and this certainty brought deep relief, a breath of fresh air to her soul. But the relief was only the first step. The journey to the Fountain of Life and the restoration of Layla's legacy promised to be long and full of challenges. She picked up the diary, her wrinkled hands turning the pages with reverence. Lyra described not only the betrayal and loss, but the strength and cunning of her family who had hidden the truth for centuries. The diary was a guide, a bridge to the past, and Elara felt Lyra's presence, an ancestress who propelled her forward. She needed to understand every detail, every clue. The map, in turn, was an enigma of symbols and drawings that Elara barely understood, but which promised to reveal the way. The greatest obstacle now was not immediate hunger or cold. The secret chamber offered temporary shelter, but the uncertainty of the path. The castle, though now a sanctuary, was still a labyrinth of ruins and dangers. How would she, an old and tired woman, guide a sick child through unknown passages, perhaps forgotten traps? Fear tried to creep in, but Elara pushed it back with the image of Layla's fragile smile. Her love for her granddaughter was an impenetrable shield against hopelessness. She needed light. The bluish gloom of the chamber was insufficient to decipher the details of the map and the tiny notes in the diary. Her eyes swept the chamber, searching for something. In the farthest corner, almost imperceptible, she saw a small recess in the wall. As she approached, fumbling, her fingers found what appeared to be a small clay lamp, empty, and beside it, flint and a dried wick. A spark of hope ignited. Elara remembered a portion of animal fat she kept, a leftover meal. With steady hands, she prepared the lamp. It wasn't much, but it would be enough to light the way. As she worked, her thoughts turned to the Fountain of Life. Lyra had written that it was a place of great power, not only for healing, but for the renewal of the spirit and reconnection with the true essence of the lineage. It was a place of hope and responsibility. The lamp lit with a small crackle, and a flickering yellowish light filled the chamber, dispelling the densest shadows. Elara felt a comforting warmth, not just from the flame, but from the renewal of her purpose. She leaned over the map again, the light revealing details that had previously been hidden, symbols of underground rivers, narrow passages, and secret chambers. The path wouldn't be easy, but now she had a guide. She looked at Layla, who slept a more peaceful sleep. The girl needed more than the herb. She needed a home, security, justice. And Elara, with the diary and map in her hands, felt like the guardian of a destiny greater than she had ever imagined. A grandmother's strength, driven by unwavering love, was capable of moving mountains. The journey to the Fountain of Life would begin at dawn, or as soon as Layla was strong enough to be carried. Elara knew that every step would be a prayer, every obstacle a test of her faith. The castle, once a refuge of despair, was now the starting point for a new life. Elara held Lyra's diary, its yellowed pages under the flickering light of the lamp, which danced and cast ghostly shadows across the chamber walls. The warmth of the flame was a welcome comfort, but Elara's mind was in a turmoil. Layla slept a deeper sleep, her chest rising and falling with a regularity that calmed her grandmother's heart. The herb was working, a small miracle that renewed Elara's faith with each soft breath of her granddaughter. With her eyes fixed on the map, Elara tried to decipher the symbols and winding lines. It looked like a labyrinth, a tangle of passages that extended beyond the chamber, delving into the depths of the castle and perhaps the earth itself. Lyra's notes, though elegant, were enigmatic, full of metaphors about paths of the soul and portals of truth. Elara, a woman of practical wisdom, felt lost amidst so much poetry. How to translate that into concrete steps? How to navigate an abandoned castle full of rubble and dangers with a sick child in her arms? Fear. An old companion tried to creep in again, whispering doubts and uncertainties. The Fountain of Life was the promise of healing and redemption, but the path to it seemed guarded by more than just distance and darkness. Elara felt her age weigh on her shoulders, the fragility of her tired body. But then the image of Layla, so small and vulnerable, rekindled the flame of her determination. She could not fail, not after all they had been through. Turning a page of the diary, Ilara found a passage that made her hold her breath. Lyra wrote not only about the physical map, but about an inner map, a path that required more than just following routes. The fountain of life does not reveal itself to impure hearts or hasty minds, Lyra's calligraphy stated. It demands truth, humility, and the memory of those who seek it. Each step must be a remembrance, each crossroads a reflection on the legacy. Ilara frowned. This was not a simple travel guide. It was a test. Lyra had hidden the true nature of the journey behind a veil of symbolism. The Fountain of Life was not just a place, but a test of dignity, a ritual of reconnection with the forgotten lineage. The map, then, did not just show passages, but stages of a process, each symbol representing a memory to be honored, a lesson to be learned, an unexpected turning point. The path was not linear, but a tapestry of emotions and memories. Ilara reread the passage, the lamp's light trembling in her hands. The truth and memory Lyra mentioned. Were they the family's stories, the values that had been lost? The journey would be a pilgrimage of self-discovery as much as a physical quest. Ilara looked at Layla, who now stirred slightly, a small smile on her lips. The girl was the key, the living link to the past and the future. Ilara felt a new wave of responsibility, but also of purpose. She was not just seeking a cure, but restoring a soul, rewriting a story. Strength would come not only from her muscles, but from her mind and heart, which would learn to decipher Lyra's secrets. The journey would be deeper, more challenging, but also more meaningful. Ilara knew she would need every ounce of her wisdom and love to guide Layla along this path of light and memory. The castle, once a refuge of despair, now revealed itself as a school of life, where Ilara and Layla would learn to redefine their destiny. Ilara clutched the diary to her chest again, Lyra's words about the inner map resonating in her mind with a disturbing clarity. It was not a stone road, with visible curves and shortcuts, but a trail of forgotten feelings and truths shrouded in mystery. As a woman who had always been guided by practical logic and the urgent need to survive, Ilara felt disoriented by so much poetry and symbolism. Her eyes swept the chamber, searching for a sign, a concrete clue that could anchor her to reality. Layla, in her peaceful and now less feverish sleep, was the image of innocence and hope, and for her sake, Ilara knew she needed to find clarity, whatever the cost. The lamp's light flickered, casting dancing shadows that seemed to mock her confusion, transforming the chamber walls into a stage of uncertainties. Ilara returned to the diary, turning the yellowed pages with renewed reverence, as if every fiber of paper contained the essence of her ancestress. The Fountain of Life does not reveal itself to impure hearts or hasty minds, Lyra had written in calligraphy that seemed to whisper across the centuries. It demands truth, humility, and the memory of those who seek it. Each step must be a remembrance, each crossroads a reflection on the legacy. Ilara reread the passage several times, the words mingling and unraveling in her tired but now more attentive mind. Truth, humility, memory, legacy. These were the pillars of the journey, the pillars of her own redemption. She thought of her own life, of the truths she had hidden from herself, of the humiliations she had suffered in silence, of the painful memories of her marriage to the tyrant and the early loss of her daughter. The legacy, for her, was misery and flight, the shadow of a stolen life. But Lyra spoke of a different legacy, one of honor and justice, of a noble lineage. Ilara felt a lump in her throat. Would the first stage of this journey be a painful introspection, a confrontation with her own deepest pains and fears to purify her heart and mind before moving forward. With a heavy sigh, Elara placed the diary and map on the pedestal, her wrinkled fingers tracing the contours of the symbols. She looked at Layla, who now seemed to breathe more easily, a small, fleeting smile playing on her childish lips. Her granddaughter's improvement was a constant reminder that there was no time for despair or to yield to doubt. The journey was not just for Layla, but for her too, to heal the wounds of her own soul and rediscover her purpose. Elara closed her eyes, trying to calm the whirlwind of thoughts that assailed her. The memory Lyra mentioned. What did it truly mean? Was it the memory of the lineage, of the stories that had been silenced and forgotten? Elara remembered her own grandmother, who, in secret and in hushed tones, told stories of a time when their family was respected before the rise of the tyrannical husband. Stories of strong women, wise healers, and guardians of the earth. Was this the memory Lyra asked to be rescued, to be brought back to light? With her eyes still closed, Elara visualized the map, not as a drawing of physical passages, but as a diagram of values, a roadmap for the spirit. Each constellation, perhaps an ideal to be achieved, each line, a principle to be followed. The fountain of life would not just be a physical place, but the apex of understanding, the reconnection with the deepest essence of her family. Humility, she realized, would be accepting that she didn't know everything, that she would need to learn and unlearn, to shed old certainties. Truth would be confronting herself and the past, without fear or disguise. Elara opened her eyes, a new determination shining in them, dispelling the last shadows of uncertainty. The first step, she decided, would be to delve into Lyra's words with an open heart and a receptive mind, seeking not just directions, but ancestral wisdom. She picked up the diary again, her wrinkled hands caressing the cover with an almost sacred reverence. It was not a heavy burden, but a treasure of teachings, a gift from a distant past. The journey would begin there, in the quietude of the chamber, with the careful reading of each page, each metaphor, each whisper from the past. Lyra's school of life was about to open its doors, and Elara, the most unlikely student, was ready to learn. She knew that every word read would be a step towards Layla's healing and her family's redemption. Elara held Lyra's diary, its yellowed pages under the flickering light of the lamp, which danced and cast ghostly shadows across the chamber walls of the ancient fortress. The warmth of the flame was a welcome comfort, but Elara's mind was in a turmoil. Lilo slept a deeper sleep, his chest rising and falling with a regularity that calmed his grandfather's heart. The herb was working, a small miracle that renewed Elara's faith with each soft breath of his grandson. With his eyes fixed on the map, Elara tried to decipher the symbols and winding lines. It looked like a labyrinth, a tangle of passages that extended beyond the chamber, delving into the depths of the fortress and perhaps the abandoned city itself. Lyra's notes, though elegant, were enigmatic, full of metaphors about paths of the soul and portals of truth. Elara, a man of practical wisdom, felt lost amidst so much poetry. How to translate that into concrete steps? How to navigate an abandoned city, full of rubble and dangers, with a sick child in his arms? Fear, an old companion, tried to creep in again, whispering doubts and uncertainties. The fountain of life was the promise of healing and redemption, but the path to it seemed guarded by more than just distance and darkness. Elara felt his age weigh on his shoulders, the fragility of his tired body. But then the image of Lilo, so small and vulnerable, rekindled the flame of his determination. He could not fail, not after all they had been through. Turning a page of the diary, Elara found a passage that made him hold his breath. Lyra wrote not only about the physical map, but about an inner map, a path that required more than just following routes. The fountain of life does not reveal itself to impure hearts or hasty minds, Lyra's calligraphy stated. It demands truth, humility, and the memory of those who seek it. Each step must be a remembrance, each crossroads, a reflection on the legacy. Ilaro frowned. This was not a simple travel guide. It was a test. Lyra had hidden the true nature of the journey behind a veil of symbolism. The Fountain of Life was not just a place, but a test of dignity, a ritual of reconnection with the forgotten lineage. The map, then, did not just show passages, but stages of a process, each symbol representing a memory to be honored, a lesson to be learned. The path was not linear, but a tapestry of emotions and memories. Ilaro reread the passage, the lamp's light trembling in his hands. The truth and memory Lyra mentioned. Were they the family's stories, the values that had been lost? The journey would be a pilgrimage of self-discovery as much as a physical quest. Ilaro looked at Lilo, who now stirred slightly, a small smile on his lips. The boy was the key, the living link to the past and the future. Ilaro felt a new wave of responsibility, but also of purpose. He was not just seeking a cure, but restoring a soul, rewriting a story. Strength would come not only from his muscles, but from his mind and heart, which would learn to decipher Lyra's secrets. The journey would be deeper, more challenging, but also more meaningful. Ilaro knew he would need every ounce of his wisdom and love to guide Lilo along this path of light and memory. The ancient fortress, once a refuge of despair, now revealed itself as a school of life, where Ilaro and Lilo would learn to redefine their destiny. Ilaro opened the diary to the first page Lyra had dedicated to the inner map. His eyes, accustomed to the gloom, strained to decipher the tiny calligraphy, but the lamp's light seemed to bless each letter, making it clearer. Lyra began with a reflection on the root, the foundation of all existence, and how the lineage had forgotten its origins, losing itself in the pursuit of ephemeral power and recognition. True strength lies in the earth that nourishes us, and in the stories that define us, Lyra had written. To honor the root is to honor oneself. Ilaro frowned, his practical mind trying to find tangible meaning. Root. He thought of the arid land of the abandoned city, of the rubble that covered what was once a home. But Lyra wasn't speaking of physical earth, he realized, but of something deeper. The family's root, its origins, its values. He remembered his own grandfather, a simple man, yet of great dignity, who always said that a man without roots is like a tree without water. This phrase, forgotten for decades under the weight of humiliations and his wife's tyranny, now resonated in his heart. A pang of regret struck him. In his youth, seeking social ascent and a more comfortable life, he had distanced himself from his own family's roots, from his grandfather's teachings. He had allowed himself to be seduced by the false glitter of nobility, which led him to a loveless marriage and a life of submission. The truth, Lyra demanded, was beginning to reveal itself. The truth about his own choices and the price he had paid for them. He looked at Lilo, who still slept, his face serene. The boy was living proof that roots, however deeply buried, could still sprout. Lilo needed more than physical healing. He needed the inheritance of his identity, the strength of a lineage that Ilaro had, in part, abandoned. The humility Lyra asked for was to recognize his own mistakes, to shed wounded pride and shame. With a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of years of silence, Ilaro continued to read. Lyra described how the lineage had cultivated a secret garden of medicinal herbs, not only to heal the body, but to strengthen the spirit and the connection with nature. This garden, she hinted, was the first memory to be reclaimed, a symbol of ancestral wisdom and the altruism that defined the family. Where the root deepens, the garden flourishes, read the final sentence on the page. Ilaro felt a warmth spread through his chest, a sense of familiarity. His grandfather also spoke of herbs, and how nature offered everything one needed. There was a small vegetable patch behind his childhood home, where his grandmother cultivated simple remedies. These memories, once vague, now gained vibrant colors, a smell of damp earth and morning dew. He realized that Lyra's secret garden was not just a physical place, but a state of mind, a reminder that healing and abundance were always linked to generosity and respect for life. The inner map began to make sense, not as an enigma, but as an invitation to revisit his own heart and his family's history. The next step, he understood, would be to seek the vestiges of this ancestral garden, not only to find more herbs for Lilo, but to rekindle the flame of a forgotten tradition. His wrinkled fingers touched the star on Lilo's wrist, a silent link to the legacy he was determined to restore. The journey of the root had only just begun, and Ilaro felt, for the first time in a long while, rooted again. Ilaro held Lyra's diary with new reverence, his wrinkled hands tracing the cover, as if he could feel the ancestral wisdom emanating from the pages. The idea of a secret garden and the need to honor the root echoed in his mind, transforming the chamber's darkness into a space of reflection and purpose. Lilo continued to sleep, a small sigh escaping his lips, and Ilaro felt a wave of love and determination that pushed away any lingering fear. He knew that the search for this garden was not just for healing herbs, but for a lost link, a part of his family's soul that needed to be reclaimed. His eyes swept the map again, searching for any clue that could link Lyra's symbolism to a physical location within the fortress or the abandoned city. The winding lines and abstract symbols now seemed less enigmatic, as if reading the diary had opened a new lens for his understanding. Ilaro remembered his grandmother, who always said that the earth speaks if we know how to listen. He needed to listen to the earth, the stones, the whispers of the past. He stood up, age weighing on his knees, but his mind sharp. The lamp in his hand trembled slightly, casting its yellowish light upon the stone walls. Where could a secret garden flourish amidst so much ruin? Lyra had written, "Where the root deepens, the garden flourishes." This made him think of the most protected places, perhaps subterranean, or areas where life stubbornly insisted on sprouting despite the abandonment. Ilaro began to circle the chamber, his eyes fixed on the floor and walls. He looked for something that indicated a connection to nature, a remnant of plant life, or perhaps an engraved symbol that referred to plants or the earth. His grandmother, in her stories, always mentioned that the ancient guardians of the lineage had a deep respect for life, and that their sacred places were always marked by natural elements. In the farthest corner of the chamber, almost hidden by a pile of collapsed stones, Ilaro noticed a small fissure in the wall, from which a faint current of fresh air seemed to come. He knelt with difficulty, pushing away the stones with his calloused hands. Behind them, a small niche was revealed, and inside it, there was no treasure, but something that made Ilaro's heart clench. A broken clay pot, with dry earth inside, and what appeared to be fossilized roots of a small plant. Beside the pot, there was a small stone plaque, covered in moss and dust, but with an engraved symbol that Ilaro recognized from Lyra's diary, a spiral ending in a leaf. It was the symbol of the deep root and flourishing. Ilaro felt an overwhelming emotion. It wasn't the garden itself, but a vestige, proof that he was on the right path. That niche was a memory, a reminder of his family's tradition of cultivating and protecting life. He touched the dry roots with his fingertips, imagining the hands of Lyra or another ancestress, tending to that plant with care. The humility Lyra asked for was to recognize that the greatness of the lineage lay not in titles or possessions, but in the connection with the earth and with life. That broken pot, those dead roots, were a silent testament to a wisdom he had forgotten. With a deep sigh, Elaro picked up the stone plaque and held it to his chest. The journey was not just to find a place, but to reconstruct a story, piece by piece. He looked at Lilo, who now stirred slightly and promised in silence that he would restore not only the boy's health, but his family's legacy. The next step would be to understand where that symbol would lead him, where the secret garden truly flourished. Elaro raised the stone plaque, the symbol of the spiral and the leaf engraved on it, seeming to vibrate in his wrinkled hands. The lamp's light danced over the surface, revealing the simple beauty of that ancestral vestige. The secret garden was not just a place, but the promise of healing for Lilo and redemption for the lineage. Elaro knew that every fiber of his being needed to be attentive, every sense sharpened to decipher the whispers of the earth and stones. He looked at the map again, the lines now seeming less random, more like an invitation to an ancient dance. The leaf symbol, he realized, was replicated at a specific point on the map, a location that extended beyond the chamber, towards what appeared to be a more protected area of the ancient fortress, perhaps an inner courtyard or a covered moat. With the stone plaque firmly held in one hand and the lamp in the other, Elaro gave Lilo one last tender caress on his forehead as the boy slept a deeper, more peaceful sleep. "I'm going, my little one," he murmured, his voice choked with emotion. "I'm going to reclaim what is ours." Age weighed on his knees, but the determination in his heart was unwavering. He moved cautiously through the chamber, his eyes sweeping every corner in search of a passage, a hint that Lyra had left more clues. The cold air of the abandoned city seemed to penetrate the cracks in the walls, but Elaro felt an inner warmth, a flame of hope that propelled him. He found a small wooden door, almost imperceptible, disguised among the stones. It was low and narrow, requiring him to bend to pass through. The smell of damp earth and ancient vegetation intensified as he advanced through a dark, winding corridor. The lamp's light barely managed to push back the shadows that danced around him, creating ghostly shapes on the walls. Elaro felt a shiver down his spine, not of fear, but of reverence. Each step was a plunge into the past, a connection with those who came before him. The corridor opened into an inner courtyard, surprisingly well preserved, where moonlight filtered through an opening in the ceiling, illuminating a small garden bed. Elaro's heart pounded. There, amidst stones and moss, small plants sprouted, some with leaves he vaguely recognized from his grandmother's stories about healing herbs. It wasn't the lush garden he had imagined, but a beginning, a vestige of the life Lyra had promised. He knelt, his hands trembling as he touched the earth. It was soft, fertile, despite everything. In the center of the garden bed, there was a larger stone, and on it, the same symbol of the spiral and the leaf was engraved, but with a depth and brilliance that the smaller plaque lacked. Elaro felt a tear stream down his wrinkled face. That was the starting point, the heart of the deep root. He looked around, and then his eyes fell upon a wall covered by a dense climbing plant. Behind it, he noticed a subtle alteration in the stone's texture, a disguised door, almost part of nature itself. With renewed effort, Elaro began to push aside the dry leaves and branches. With each movement, hope grew in his chest. The door, made of dark, heavy wood, was ajar, revealing an even deeper darkness. He pushed, and with a melancholic creak, it yielded. The air from within was damp and fragrant, laden with the sweet, earthy aroma of plants. Elaro lit the lamp and entered, his eyes wide. There, beneath the earth, in a subterranean chamber that seemed to have been forgotten by time, stretched a garden. Not a modest flower bed, but a verdant oasis, illuminated by a soft light that came from cracks in the ceiling, creating an ethereal glow. Plants of all shapes and sizes grew in abundance, their leaves and flowers exuding an intoxicating perfume. Ilaro recognized some of the herbs his grandmother mentioned, and among them, with its dark green leaves and delicate flowers, was the rare medicinal herb that would cure Lilo. It was Lyra's fountain of life, not a source of water but of plant life, a treasure of wisdom and healing. The climax of the journey, the promise fulfilled, shone before his eyes, a silent testament to love and perseverance. Ilaro knelt on the damp soil of the subterranean garden, the sweet, earthy scent of the plants enveloping him like an ancestral embrace. His tear-filled eyes scanned the dark green leaves and delicate flowers of the medicinal herb, the same one Lyra had described in the diary. It was the fountain of life, not a spring of water, but an oasis of healing and hope, pulsating with the energy of the forgotten lineage. With trembling but steady hands, he plucked the leaves with the care of one touching a sacred treasure, feeling the fresh sap on his wrinkled fingers. That place was more than a garden. It was living proof that the wisdom of his ancestors had never truly died, merely slumbered, waiting to be rediscovered. He returned to the chamber where Lilo slept, his heart beating with a mix of urgency and gratitude. The lamp, once a solitary point of light in the darkness, now seemed to radiate a stronger glow, illuminating his grandson's serene face. Ilaro crushed the herb leaves with a smooth stone, mixing them with a little water he had saved. The strong, penetrating scent of the infusion filled the air, a promise of relief. Delicately he lifted Lilo's head and drop by drop administered the remedy. The boy swallowed with difficulty, but without protest, and Ilaro observed every movement, every breath, with his soul in prayer. The following hours were a test of patience and faith. Ilaro remained by Lilo's side, holding his small hand, feeling the fever gradually subside. The cold sweat on the boy's forehead began to dry, and his breathing, once ragged, became softer and more regular. At dawn, a pale sunbeam penetrated through the chamber's crevices, and Lilo opened his eyes. They were no longer clouded by illness, but clear and curious, fixing on his grandfather with a glimmer of recognition. A small smile bloomed on the boy's lips, and he murmured, his voice weak but audible, "Grandpa." Ilaro felt a lump in his throat, tears streaming freely down his face. He embraced Lilo with a tenderness that seemed to contain all the love and relief in the world. His grandson's healing was the resolution of his greatest fear, the confirmation that the journey had not been in vain. But Lilo's healing was only the beginning. Lyra's diary and the secret garden had revealed not just a remedy, but an inheritance, a purpose. Lilo's lineage, once forgotten and dishonored, now flourished again. He knew that the ambitious relatives, thirsty for land and titles, would no longer have power over them. The true treasure was not material, but ancestral wisdom, the connection with the earth, and the healing that nature offered. The abandoned city, once a refuge of despair, now transformed into a home, a sanctuary where Lilo's life would be nurtured and his family's legacy restored. Ilaro looked at the diary, then at the map, and finally at Lilo's sleeping face. The truth and humility Lyra asked for had been found in his own heart, in his choices, and in his unwavering love. A grandfather's strength had rewritten destiny, transforming misery into hope and abandonment into a new beginning. The journey had reached its climax of healing and redemption, and Ilaro felt that for the first time in a long while he was truly home. The days that followed Lilo's healing were filled with a serenity Ilaro never thought he would feel again. The boy, once pale and feverish, recovered with surprising speed, his eyes now shining with the vivacity and curiosity characteristic of childhood. The subterranean garden, Lyra's fountain of life, became a sanctuary, a place where Ilaro and Lilo spent hours, the grandfather teaching his grandson the names of the herbs, their properties, and the importance of caring for the earth that nourished them. Lilo, with his renewed energy, ran through the corridors of the abandoned city, which now seemed less gloomy and more like a playground of discoveries. Ilaro watched him, a tender smile on his lips, his heart light. The fever had completely disappeared, and with it, the weight of the anguish that had oppressed him for so long. Each day, Ilaro felt more connected to his own history and that of his lineage. Lyra's diary was no longer just a guide to healing, but a book of wisdom, revealing the true essence of his family. Not the empty nobility of titles and possessions, but the richness of connection with nature, altruism, and the silent strength of a legacy rooted in the earth. He read to Lilo the passages about the inner map, explaining that the true journey was of the heart, to honor the roots and values that defined them. Lilo, though small, seemed to absorb every word, his eyes fixed on his grandfather, as if he understood the depth of those lessons. The abandoned city, once a symbol of his misery and despair, had transformed. The subterranean garden provided not only medicinal herbs, but also some vegetables and fruits that Ilaro, with his acquired knowledge, began to cultivate with care. The secret chamber, where everything had begun, became their refuge, a welcoming home where the lamp burned with a constant glow, warding off the shadows of the past. The stone walls, once cold and impersonal, now resonated with Lilo's laughter and the stories told by Ilaro. Ilaro knew that the ambitious relatives might still try to claim the lands that by right belonged to Lilo's lineage. But the fear that once paralyzed him had disappeared. He possessed Lyra's diary, the map, and, most importantly, the proof of a forgotten lineage that belonged to Lilo. The star on the boy's wrist, once a mystery, was now an emblem of his identity and his inalienable right. The true treasure was not gold or jewels, but ancestral wisdom, the healing that nature offered, and the unbreakable family connection he had reclaimed. He had rewritten his own destiny, not by fleeing misery, but by transforming it into a foundation for a future of hope. A grandfather's strength, driven by unwavering love, had not only saved his grandson from death, but also restored a lost legacy, proving that true wealth resides in the heart and soul. Ilaro and Lilo, together, were living proof that even in ruins, life can flourish, and that hope, like the herbs of the secret garden, always finds a way to sprout and heal. The abandoned city, now their home, bore witness to the new beginning, a silent testament that love and perseverance are the greatest fortunes of all. Ilaro looked at Lilo, who now hugged him tightly, and felt the peace that only a true home and unconditional love can offer. The days that followed transformed the abandoned city into a refuge of life and learning, a silent testament to the resilience of the human spirit. With each sunrise, the sun painted the ruins with golden hues, and Ilaro and Lilo began their routines with renewed purpose. Lilo, with his health restored, radiated contagious energy. His small bare feet ran through the courtyards, exploring every corner of the fortress that was now his home. Ilaro watched him, a tender smile on his lips, his heart overflowing with deep gratitude. The boy was no longer the fragile being who was wasting away, but the personification of hope, a strong sprout of the lineage he had reclaimed. The subterranean garden became the heart of their existence. Ilaro dedicated hours to caring for the plants, teaching Lilo the secrets of the earth, the importance of each herb, the delicacy of harvesting, and the wisdom of respecting nature. Lilo, with his curious eyes, absorbed every teaching, his small hands helping to water and plant, an unbreakable bond forming between grandfather, grandson, and the earth. Lyra's diary was read and reread, its yellowed pages revealing not only the history of the lineage, but also the life philosophy of their ancestors, altruism as a compass, justice as a foundation, and human connection as the most valuable of riches. Hilaro explained to Lilo that true nobility lay not in titles or possessions, but in kindness of heart and strength of character. The secret chamber, once a hiding place of despair, was now a welcoming home. Hilaro and Lilo had arranged a small space with warm blankets and a gently crackling fire, warming the environment and warding off the shadows of loneliness. Lilo's laughter echoed through the stone walls, filling the emptiness that had once dominated the place. The lamp, always lit, symbolized the flame of hope that would never extinguish. Hilaro knew that the ambitious relatives, in their quest for land and power, would eventually discover that he and Lilo had not disappeared. But the fear that once tormented him had been replaced by an unwavering calm. He possessed the diary, the map, and, most importantly, the irrefutable proof of Lilo's lineage, a legacy that could not be contested. The star on the boy's wrist, once a mystery, was now an emblem of his identity and his inalienable right. True justice would be restored, not by force, but by truth. The abandoned city, once a place of dark legends, was slowly being transformed by the presence of Hilaro and Lilo. Small garden beds began to appear in the courtyards, cultivated with seeds from the secret garden, promising a harvest of life and abundance. Hilaro's triumph was not just finding a cure for Lilo, but rewriting his own destiny, from a disinherited and hopeless man to a guardian of a legacy, a father and a grandfather who had found his true home. Hilaro looked at the horizon, where the sun was setting, painting the sky with vibrant colors. Lilo was by his side, his small hand in Hilaro's. The connection between them was palpable, a love that transcended difficulties and losses. A grandfather's strength, driven by unwavering love, had not only saved his grandson from death, but also restored a lost legacy, proving that true wealth resides in the heart and soul. The journey had culminated in a new beginning, where hope flourished amidst the ruins, and life, like the herbs of the secret garden, always found a way to sprout and heal. The abandoned city, now their home, bore witness to the power of love and perseverance, the greatest fortunes of all.